Chapter 51. Terran Sector, Earth. Bridge, ISS Independence. Proctor made it to the bridge in record time, and it still felt too slow. By the time she got there, the bridge was dead silent, except for the comm speakers which were broadcasting Curiel's voice. Suffered indignation after indignation, outrage after outrage. And Sangre de Cristo was just the tip of the iceberg, my fellow citizens. For decades, those of us on the periphery have suffered in silence while the rich get richer, those in power accumulate more power, and the small portion of society that is at the top grinds their heels down on the rest of us. The evidence that I've broadcast today is indisputable, and the conclusion obvious, and let me be clear. I come in peace. The Galactic People's Congress is a peaceful, democratic organization devoted to the just and peaceful and fair government of all humanity, whatever world or moon or station they live on. If weapons are fired now or hereafter, it will never start with us, for we are— Proctor glanced at Lieutenant QWERTY and motioned her hand across her throat. Curiel's voice dropped down to a background murmur. How long has he been going on like that? And what is this evidence he referred to? About 5 minutes so far of his political garbage, said Yarborough, with what Proctor interpreted as pure derision. And the evidence is flimsy at best. He claims to have a video of the Sangre incident, contends that one of his ships was transporting a recovered nuke to CENTCOM San Martin to turn over to UE authorities, when it was hijacked by an alleged shadow organization within IDF who then launched the nuke at the planet. A video? Heavily edited, no doubt. Let's see it. Proctor sat down in the captain's chair. QWERTY nodded and brought the video up on the front view screen. The familiar view of Earth was replaced by a now equally familiar view of the Magdalena Issachar, familiar at least to Proctor, who had spent enough time looking at a rendering of the ship, wondering if it had been her nephew's coffin. Except the Magdalena Issachar wasn't alone. A larger, sleeker vessel approached rapidly. Its lines and angles, along with the subtle bristling weapons dotting the hull, made it clear that it was a state-of-the-art military ship. Commander Yarborough, you've been involved in our shipbuilding program. Is that one of ours? He hesitated. Yes, ma'am. But according to the video, there are no hull markings, no nameplate, nothing to identify it. A pit formed in her stomach as she watched the ship dock with the Magdalena Issachar. Nothing happened for a minute, so she motioned for QWERTY to advance the video until there was more movement. A figure emerged from one of the smaller airlocks, clad in a vacuum suit. The distance was too great to see a face, but somehow from the posture and the way it carried itself, the way it moved, she knew. Danny, she breathed. The tiny figure crawled along the hull, away from the military vessel attached to the docking port. Before long, the other ship detached and left, and moments later the Magdalena Issachar's engines came to life, propelling it towards the surface of Sangre de Cristo. The figure crouched on the hull, and then jumped. Both the ship and the tiny figure grew small in the video feed as they plummeted down, until finally the feed washed out with the explosion of the ship just kilometers above one of the habitat domes on the surface. So, Danny was dead then. She had somehow known deep down that was the case, and yet all along she had to be sure. Now she was sure. And now it was time for payback. Admiral, the broadcast stopped. Secretary General Curiel is hailing us, said QWERTY. She nodded. Put him on. The screen had returned to a view of Earth with a smattering of ships in the foreground, Curiel's fleet. A collection of what looked like second-hand frigates, freighters, cruise liners, and colonial ships. Proctor suddenly understood where the fleet had come from. Rex, she said. The man was more than a used ship salesman. He must also have been the GPC's lead ship procurer. Curiel appeared on the screen, his attractive face lined but resolute. He knew a million cameras were recording him, so he was putting on his best show. Admiral, I'm glad you're here. Me too, Curiel. Though I wonder why you are. Redress of grievances, Admiral. A basic right guaranteed by our government. She shrugged. Backed up by a fleet? Looks more like a threat to me. Honor God. And please, these ships are no match for you or any IDF battleship. Lieutenant QWERTY caught her attention. Admiral, it's President Quimby. He wants to talk to both you and Curiel. Perfect. Just like the old days. Caught up in a galactic diplomatic incident while there's a war for survival going on. Put him on. Join the party. Now there were two men looking down at her from the screen. One telegenic and determined, leading a burgeoning resistance movement and knowing he had to come across as plausible and presidential. The other old, but just as telegenic as all presidents must be, the leader of all of United Earth. Mr. President, she said. Aren't you supposed to be out saving civilization, Admiral? He said. Where's the alien ship? Have you destroyed it yet? She understood what was going on, at least on President Quimby's end. The cameras were running, after all. Setting himself up as above politics, concerned only for the safety and security of all humanity. President Quimby, you are intentionally avoiding the important issues and people I am here representing, began Curiel. I demand an immediate, really, Mr. Curiel. Earth and all its worlds face an existential threat, and all you care about is politics? Quimby tutted and turned back to Proctor. Admiral, I asked you a question. She nodded. Damn it. Getting thrust into politics was as far down her to-do list as it was possible to be, right after scrubbing the mold off the grout in her shower. That's why I'm here, Mr. President. I have reason to believe that Earth itself is in immediate danger. And why would you think that, Admiral? The alien ship is not here. Do you have intel suggesting it's on its way? I do, yes. She didn't know how much to tell him, at least about the cryptic warning given to her by the Skiora matriarch, and especially over a channel that was being broadcast all over Earth. And what are you here to do about it? Lieutenant Whitehorse cut in. Admiral! She spun around. What? The fighter bay. Something just came out of it. A large container. The readings are odd. Odd. The pit in her stomach grew deeper. Put it on screen. The faces of the President and Secretary General were replaced by a backdrop of Earth, with a storage container tumbling on its axis. Get me Captain Valls, she said. QWERTY shook his head. Comm to the CIC is down, but there's an audio broadcast coming from the bay itself. He tapped a few buttons and the speakers blared with a vaguely familiar voice, young and nervous. Long live the Galactic People's Congress. I do this on the orders of Secretary General Curiel, Admiral Proctor, and on behalf of all freedom-loving people across the worlds of Earth. The voice paused and Proctor finally recognized it. The deckhand. Floppy blonde-hair kid, the one who was almost overcome with awe at the sight of her. Yeoman Sanders continued, voice rising in emotion. We'll never forget Sangre. The voice cut out, overwhelmed by the sound of an explosion. She felt it underneath her feet as it shook the whole ship. Chapter 52. Terran Sector, Earth. Bridge, ISS Independence. Explosion in the fighter bay, Admiral, Whitehorse yelled from Tactical. Reading massive damage down there. Proctor's mouth hung open. Ballsy, she whispered. And on the screen, something happened. Almost in slow motion, it was so unthinkable. The walls of the storage container drifting down towards Earth fell away, revealing the contents. A missile, topped by the unmistakable shape of a nuclear warhead. The rocket engine at the rear ignited and it leaped away towards the surface. Commander! She rushed over to QWERTY. Hack into it. Disable it. Disarm it. Working on it, ma'am. His hands danced over the console like it was a piano and he was a maestro. But to her chagrin, he shook his head. I can't get into the warhead's control system, Admiral. Wait a second. Hold on. She gripped the edge of the comm station. QWERTY finally nodded. I disabled the thrusters. It's just ballistic now. She turned to the screen. Sure enough, the rocket engine had turned off, but it was still plummeting down towards the surface. Proctor recognized the European continent down below, clouds covering half of England and France. The Alps glistened with snow down towards the southeast in the distance. Time to impact. About 12 minutes, 20 seconds, ma'am, said Lieutenant Whitehorse, depending on what elevation it's programmed to detonate at. Prepare railguns. Whitehorse shook her head. I don't recommend that, ma'am. Why not? Said Proctor. That missile is big enough to hit with macrail slugs, she said, doing some quick mental calculations. The slug would hit atmosphere and encounter heavy turbulence and eddies, but it would stay on course long enough to hit the nuke. If we miss, we'll take another shot, as many as it takes. It's a MIRV, ma'am. There are at least 15 warheads on that thing. If we hit it just right, then maybe, but if we hit it wrong, then we have 15 ballistic nukes on our hands. Fine. Then we start targeting all 15. Whitehorse's brow furrowed. Hang on. That's odd. Now what? Before she could ask, Lieutenant QWERTY waved a hand to get her attention. Admiral, an IDF fleet just Q-jumped into the vicinity. I've got Admiral Mullins on the comm. Mullins? What the hell is he doing all the way out here? She spun around to Commander Yarbrough, who was busy with coordinating damage control for the fighter bay, presumably. Commander? Do you know anything about this? You've been in contact with him. He didn't even look up. Sorry, Admiral, I can't answer that. My hands are a little full at the moment. Whitehorse finally looked up, her expression pale. Admiral, weapon systems are locked down. I can't get into the system. Proctor's spine stiffened. The conspiracy ran deeper than I thought. She wanted to kick herself for being so careless. Attention to detail used to be her thing. When she was a captain, she'd have noticed all the little details and assembled a complete picture of the threat before anyone else even realized something was up. Now she was caught with her pants down. Admiral Mullins coming on screen, ma'am, said QWERTY. She turned to face the screen. Ted, thank God. We've had an incident over here and we've lost access to our... His face glowered at her. How could you, Shelby? Fleet Admiral Oppenheimer trusted you to protect us against that thing, and here you are conspiring against the legitimate government of United Earth. So, her suspicions were correct. The explosion at CENTCOM Bolivar, the officers Civic had seen murder the contractor, the Miguel Urquiza pausing rescue operations to chase after Civic and Batak, Mullins's demand that Proctor return the two of them to him at Bolivar rather than to Admiral Tigre on San Martin. It all started to add up. And the CEO vacancy at the top of Shovik Orion. CENTCOM Bolivar was in the heart of Shovik Orion City. Admiral Mullins. I'd expect no less from the CEO of Shovik Orion. Tell me, how is that job working out for you? Invested heavily into metaspace singularity research, I presume? He smiled, thinly, strained. It was clear the fact she was on to him had caught him off guard, but knowing he was on camera for all of Earth to see, he had to keep playing his part. You are hereby under arrest. Your authority over this mission vacated, all security credentials revoked. You are ordered to... She turned to QWERTY and cut her hand across her throat. Shut him the hell up! A moment later, the Admiral's angry face was replaced by the image of Earth. The camera had zoomed in to the missile, which was still falling down to the vulnerable surface below. Lieutenant Whitehorse, are the lasers charged at least? Yes, ma'am. Give me a targeting option and open fire when ready. Whitehorse nodded and worked her controls, but then hesitated again. Ma'am, I'm reading an odd sensor signature coming off the missile. Odd? How so? She knew before Whitehorse could reply. Somehow, Mullins had done it. If they'd smuggled a nuke onto the Independence, then surely they'd smuggled the other part too. A metaspace background signature. She shook her head. It's just odd is all. Shall I fire? The metaspace shunt. If that nuke blew, dumping not just one warhead's worth of energy into the metaspace shunt, but 15, who knew what the consequences would be? The Skiora matriarch, Krull, had claimed that the earlier explosion over Sangre had momentarily incapacitated every living Skiora, and implied that Dulmasi fared far worse. Was that Mullins's angle? Incapacitate the known alien races or start a war? Wars were profitable things, after all, and the new CEO of Shovik Orion might have brought a new revenue stream with him. No, do not fire. Ma'am? Whitehorse looked up at her in surprise, as did the whole bridge crew. "Do not fire," she said slowly, urgently. "We need another option. There's a device on that thing that will—" She noticed that everyone's heads were turned not towards her, but towards a point behind her. She turned. Commander Yarbrough stood there, a sidearm pointed at her chest. "Admiral Proctor, I'm sorry. You're under arrest." Chapter 53. Terran Sector, Earth. Bridge, ISS Independence. She stared down the barrel of the gun. What caliber was it, she wondered? Would it hurt? It was pointed straight at her heart. Death would come quickly. Her blood pressure would plummet within a second, resulting in rapid loss of consciousness. She would stumble, probably grab for her chair and fail as she blacked out. Would they try to take her to sick bay and attempt to revive her? She went through the odds. Revival from a bullet through the heart? They'd have to quickly hook her up to the life support machine to have even the remotest possibility of saving her. Then they'd have to patch her heart, inject it with stimulants, and hope for the best. It was strange what the mind thought of when confronted with existential danger, the thought occurred to her. She almost laughed. In the face of death, she'd slipped back into scientist mode, looking at her situation with the cold, clinical eye of someone studying an interesting problem. It felt good. "Commander Yarbrough, trust me, you don't want to do this." She slowly put her hands up. He flipped the safety off. "Oh? You've betrayed us all, Admiral. First you and your nephew colluded with Admiral Tigre to bomb Sangre, trying to make it look like a GPC false flag attack on its own people. And now you're willing to write off tens of millions of people down in Europe? No, I think I really do want to do this." So, Yarbrough was in on it too. Figures. "Commander Yarbrough," she repeated, slower. "You don't want to do this. Lower your weapon, now." He sneered. "Why?" 2 seconds later, a fine pink mist exploded out of the side of his forehead, and a hole bloomed blood. He instantly collapsed. Behind him, covered in soot, grime, and blood of his own, stood Ballsy. "That's why," she said, considering the body on the floor in mild dismay. She'd prefer he didn't die, but given the circumstances, better him than her. "You okay?" asked Ballsy. "Fine. You?" She looked closer at his grimy face. His cheeks, temple, and forehead were scored with cuts and gashes, and one eye was swollen shut. "Been better. You were right about that data file. I checked everything and found something strange. The timestamps for the sensor logs of several supply shipments were dated to an hour ago. Someone overwrote them, and then the fighter bay exploded. I figured that and us launching that nuke, there had to be someone on board who was in on the whole thing. Someone on the bridge, no less. They must have been GPC all along," he said, indicating the body. "Or Shovik Orion." Ballsy shrugged. "Does it matter?" "It will eventually, but right now—" She glanced up at the screen, at the nuke still tumbling down towards northern Europe. "Ballsy, we've got to disable that thing within the next 10 minutes. "Fine, shoot it." "Can't." The realization on his face was easy to read. "Oh. Metaspace shunt. If we hit it, the nuke explodes and the Sciora get juiced." "And the Dolmasi. 15 times as powerful as the one on Sangre. And Ballsy, the more I think about this, the more I'm of the opinion that the mystery ship did not show up at random. This was not a coincidence." He was still gripping the gun, staring down at his gruesome handiwork. The entire bridge crew was still too shocked to say anything, and so they listened. "Right. So, stop the nuke." A shadow passed over his face. "I know just the man to help us." Proctor considered. She knew what he was suggesting, but it didn't seem likely. Or possible. "The fighter bay is in ruins, isn't it?" "It is." He turned back to the exit, and before he left, he called back, "But the shuttle bay is okay." Before she could reply or protest, he was gone, and she was left staring at the corpse bleeding out on the deck. "Godspeed, Ethan." Chapter 54. Terran Sector, Earth. Sickbay, ISS Independence. Civic grunted. Ow, careful! Sorry! He steeled his jaw while she tried again. After all the advances in medical technology, it seemed peeling away crusty wound dressings would always hurt. She worked slowly, gingerly, but with eyes that made clear she thought it was the coolest thing in the world. You're like a machine, you know. He mustered a chuckle. Why, thank you. I get that a lot. She play-slapped him on the knee before returning her attention to his shoulder. No, dumbass. I mean your body, my body, like machines. I became a mechanic because I liked taking things apart. But shit, this is fun. She peeled off another wrap, tearing away some crusty, coagulated blood and fluid with it. Shit! He bit down on a fist as another wrap came off. You can take them apart, yes, but can you put them back together? Oh, don't be a baby, she said, pulling another wrap away a little too quickly. He grunted in pain. Can't we call a nurse over or something? He said through gritted teeth. How many are left? He craned his neck to see, but half the bandages were on his back where the direct rays from the shuttle's explosion had hit him. Just a few. And no. Her tone became grim. They're all busy. With casualties. I'm a casualty. She pulled the last one off. You're alive. That's more than half the people who came through those doors can say. He glanced out the window of their little examination room, out onto the main floor of sickbay. Nearly every bed was full, and to his chagrin he saw she was right. Many of the beds held figures completely draped in a sheet. The doctor and nurses on staff were rushing between the dozen or so patients that were alive, but only just. Guess I had it lucky. The door to sickbay burst open. It was him. Valls scanned the room, then caught his eye through the window. We have company, he said, watching his father make his way through the maze of temporary beds laid out. Valls wasted no time once he passed the threshold. He glanced once over his raw, exposed side and back and nodded, as if he were saying, It's not all that bad. Come on, we've got a mission. The tone of his voice said he wasn't there for an argument, that shit was serious. Can I get these replaced? Civic said, inclining his head toward his side. No time. Europe is going to get iced within 8 minutes unless we move now. We've got a nuke to catch. Batak whistled. Civic stood up and followed Valls out without another word. Bandages could wait. As they jogged down the halls towards the shuttle bay, his shirt still off and the breeze soothing his raw skin, his father gave him the rundown. So we can't just blow it up because of the shunt, otherwise bad aliens show up. Got it. Can't we just remove the shunt? Said a voice behind him. He glanced back, surprised to see Batak running behind him. The hell are you doing? He said as they passed the threshold of the shuttle bay's anteroom. Sounds like you guys needed a mechanic, she said, shrugging. Valls waved them both towards a shuttle, which was already idling. Join the party. You may be right, we could use an extra set of hands, especially ones that know what they're doing. Civic stopped halfway up the ramp. Wait, you're not coming too, are you? Of course I am. You're going to do some fancy flying while I suit up, jump out, and lasso us a nuke. Civic wanted to protest more, but he knew time was running out. Sounds like as good a plan as any. He sat down in the pilot seat and didn't even wait for them to sit before he punched the engines and pushed the shuttle out of the bay. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw both his father and Batak shimmy into vacuum suits. 6 minutes, he said, glancing at the timer displayed on the console. He noticed the tactical crew on the bridge had linked up to his computer and were sending him all the telemetry data he'd need to maneuver safely up to the missile. Safely, though, was a relative word. Had the situation not been so dire, he might have enjoyed the breathtaking view. Coming down through Earth's atmosphere was always a treat. Other planets had continents and shining atmospheres and green land masses and blue cloud-dappled oceans, but none of them looked like this. And none of them were where he'd killed his own mother and stepfather. He grimaced. He had promised himself he wouldn't think about it, but the memory was unavoidable, now that he was descending down through the exact same airspace where it had happened. You'll love Paris, his mother had said. You and Jerusha should come with us. Jerusha had been busy with exams and couldn't come, but Civic had gone. flying the shuttle himself from the Westphalia station down through IDF's Western European airspace. His buddies from the academy were stationed at Urwescom, and so he knew they'd be watching his descent. He thought he'd show off a little, give them a little show, give his stepfather a little thrill. The men hated flying, after all. "Ethan, head in the game!" Vols yelled. He'd been staring out the viewport, and now he snapped to. "Nearly there," he announced. He glanced back up. Both his father and Batak had finished suiting up. "So, I suppose you have a plan?" Vols shrugged. "It's in development." He pulled open a compartment and hefted out a tow of utility cable. "I suppose we could latch onto it somehow and arrest its descent. That'll at least buy us time." "You're the boss, boss." He angled the shuttle up above the tumbling missile now that it showed up on his scopes. "It's spinning. You'll never be able to latch on, not without clanging into it. And wouldn't it just be our luck if that initiated detonation?" Vols nodded. "Once it hits the upper atmosphere, the tail fins will right it. We'll have to move fast before it gets any lower into the atmosphere, though." His father fiddled with the cable and hooks while Civic maneuvered the shuttle to just a few dozen meters away from the missile. A familiar voice came over the comm. "Ethan, it's Jerusha." Like a ghost from his past. He shoved his complicated, conflicted feelings down deep and answered. "What is it?" "The nuke. We've been scanning it, and it looks like the hair trigger is engaged." "What does that mean for us?" Though he knew the answer already. It meant that their current plan was shit. "Just one tap and that thing blows. It can handle atmospheric re-entry and the stray particle of dust or sand flying at 1,000 kph, but it's triggered to go off at the slightest touch of anything bigger than that." No one said a word. Civic could hear his father mutter a stream of profanities under his breath. Finally, Batak leaned over his seat and spoke into the comm. "What about just a person touching it? Enough to disengage the shunt?" Whitehorse hesitated. I suppose that might be okay. Honestly, I don't know. I just know that if your plan is to try and wrangle that thing into the shuttle's cargo hold while that trigger is engaged, you're toast. Not just toast, vapor is more like it." Vols dropped the cable. "Okay, I'm going out there. Ride that thing like one of the horses of the apocalypse until I can pry the damn shunt off." Batak was studying the sensor readout of the missile, tracing her finger along lines only she could see. "No. You can't pry it off without severe dislocation stress at the point of attachment. It's got to be disabled, not detached." "Can you do that?" Civic called back to his father. Before he could respond, Batak nodded. "No, he can't." She yanked open a utility drawer and pulled out a repair kit and slung it over her shoulder. "But I can." Chapter 55. Terran Sector, Earth. Bridge. ISS Independence. Proctor watched the scene unfold on the monitor as a small figure emerged from the hatch of the shuttle. She gripped her armrests tightly, holding her breath, silently willing the bomb not to explode. The background murmur of the bridge dropped away completely as everyone watched in silence. The missile had righted itself as the upper atmosphere finally created enough drag on the tail, and the figure holding onto the shuttle's hatch crouched down and jumped. Miraculously, she reached out and grabbed onto a small protrusion on the missile and pulled herself in, straddling the thing like she was riding a horse. Proctor almost couldn't believe her eyes until she looked around at the rest of the bridge crew to confirm they were watching the same thing. The figure was clutching onto the missile with her thighs, a cable dangling off her ankle and flapping slightly in the thin atmosphere, leading back up to the shuttle, where another figure, ballsy she supposed, stood at the hatch, one hand on the cable where it connected to the shuttle. "Admiral, the Vanguard is maneuvering to intercept," said Whitehorse. She pointed to QWERTY. "Open a channel." "Open, ma'am." Proctor stood up. "Admiral Mullins, this is Proctor. Hold your distance, Ted, or things get messy." A chuckle. "Was that a threat, Shelby?" She knew the whole world was listening, including the top brass of IDF, the government of UE, and President Quimby himself. Most of what she was about to say was classified. Screw it. "Mullins, back the hell off. That thing has a device on it that will shunt half the energy into metaspace. For all we know, it will summon the Golgothic ship here." Another laugh. "And how would you know that, Shelby, unless you had designed the thing? You're digging your own grave here, Admiral. Now get out of the way so I can take the shot. Lives are at stake, you know. I'm not going to stand by while you let Europe burn. Bastard. If nothing else, that confirmed for her that he was the one who'd arranged for the metaspace shunts to be designed and built, and somehow smuggled onto the Independence. No other reason to pin the blame on her for all of humanity to hear. Ensign Risa, keep us between the Vanguard and the shuttle. Match their every move. She turned to Tactical. Status? From these readings, looks like the shunt is still active. The comm crackled. It was Batak breathing heavily. Okay, guys, I'm about to cut into the shunt. I want you far away from this thing when I do. Bull, said Civic, his voice answering her over the comm. We're not going anywhere. We're pulling you out the second you get that thing off. On the screen, the tiny figure of Batak reached down to her ankle, fiddled a moment, and pulled the utility cable off. It flapped away. Sarah? Civic yelled. Get the hell out of here, Ethan. You can come back for me when I'm done. Go! Now! She was breathing heavily. The timer on the view screen was down to under a minute. After a moment, the shuttle wavered a bit as if the pilot were going back and forth with a decision, before finally pulling off and shooting upward into the sky as the missile continued its descent. It was entering the stratosphere now, and the winds looked to be terrible since Batak had hunched over and hugged the missile tightly, one hand still poking something into the protrusion on the warhead. Almost there, she breathed. Cutting through the power source. Proctor could hardly breathe. Admiral! Whitehorse yelled out from Tactical. The Vanguard is accelerating to port. They've got a clear shot. Risa, match them. Trying, ma'am, the ensign said, rattled. The breathing over the comm grew rapid and heavy. Main power off, thank God. Auxiliary still attached. One moment. Ethan, be ready to come get me. Whitehorse called across the bridge. Vanguard is firing lasers. With a crackle, the comm cut out, and on the screen the reason was clear. Complete saturation overwhelmed the view screen. When it cleared slightly, she could barely make out the shuttle shooting up out of the atmosphere. At the periphery of her hearing, she could hear Civic screaming profanities through the comm. She wanted to shout them at Mullins herself. It was like the atmosphere below them was glowing incandescent. She remembered the old images from the first swarm war, when the swarm had bombarded their cities with weaponry so powerful it sent giant mushroom clouds up nearly into orbit. Then, during the second swarm war, with her own eyes, she had seen something similar repeated dozens of times over. Entire continents exploding upward as the crust and mantle below was sucked into a singularity, creating unthinkable pressures which then lifted the ground to the sky. Some planets' surfaces didn't see the sun again for years from all the dust. This was different. It was still so high up that obviously there was no dust to kick up, and the air was so thin anyway that very little differentiation took place. Instead, they saw a glowing teardrop, falling in slow motion upward towards space. And in the center of it would be the gaseous remains, free-floating atoms and molecules, of Sarah Batak. Her enemy now had a face. It was not the face of some mysterious alien ship that poked holes into sparsely inhabited moons. It was the face of Admiral Mullins. It was the face of betrayal. Lieutenant QWERTY, she said, as measured and calmly as possible. What did we pick up on metaspace? The comm officer studied his console before shaking his head. Looks like with the main power cut to the shunt, the worst of it stayed there in the atmosphere. But some of it leaked into metaspace. Probably because it was partially powered by the auxiliary batteries, I suppose. Was it enough? Had Batak given her life for a reason? The President is ordering the fleet to intercept Kuriel ships and take him into custody, said QWERTY. She shook her head. That's just going to heighten tensions. There will be civil war before the week is over. Admiral Mullins's fleet started to surround the small GPC force, flanking them, preventing them from going into a higher orbit where they could make Q-jumps. More flickers on the screen announced the arrival of yet more ships. Now what? Admiral Mullins, this is Admiral Tigre. What the hell is going on? We were hanging back at Lunar Base and we just detected a nuclear explosion in the atmosphere over Europe. There was a lot of cross-chatter between the two admirals, CENTCOM, the President, and Proctor tried to keep up with the conversation, while simultaneously tracking the progress of the shuttle and keeping an eye on the long-range metaspace comm, looking for what she hoped not to see. It came anyway. "Ma'am, picking up a metaspace broadcast from Saturn," said Lieutenant Querty. He looked up, his face turning white. "The Golgothics are here." Chapter 56. Terran Sector, Earth. Bridge, ISS Independence. "What's it doing?" She was standing over the comm station, not even remembering how she got there. The arrival of the alien ship could only mean one thing. It was going for the prize. Earth. The auxiliary-powered shunt on that bomb was still enough to catch the attention of the Golgothics. "A message from Brandenburg Station on Rhea says they've detected an unidentified vessel matching the description of our alien ship that just Q-jumped into the Saturnian system. It's moving towards Titan." "Titan? There's nothing on Titan," she murmured, before turning back to Mumford. "Am I right? Nothing on Titan?" He shook his head. "Too inhospitable, ma'am. There used to be a research station there, but it's long since been abandoned. There is an orbital station, though, just a supply and refuel depot. A few hundred people living there, tops." She nodded. "Very well. Ensign Risa, plot a T-jump to Titan." "Ma'am," said Lieutenant Whitehorse, "is it worth leaving the current situation to go save a few hundred station folk?" "It is, Lieutenant. It's our mission. Because after Titan, what's next for that thing? The Saturnian system alone has millions of people living on the moons. Rhea, Mimas, New Mongolia City on Iapetus. I'm not going to abandon them because a corporation wants to engage in a little petty war profiteering and have bought off an admiral to do it. Risa, are we ready?" "Ready, Admiral." "Initiate." The background chatter on the comm dropped away and the cooling nuclear teardrop cloud disappeared. In the place of a cloud-dappled blue earth came a misty, rust-colored globe. "Arrived at Titan and entering orbit, Admiral," said Ensign Risa. Proctor stalked back to her seat at the center of the bridge. "Lieutenant, anything on sensors?" "Yes, ma'am. Detecting the alien ship holding station at a northern latitude." She sat down. It was showtime. "Get the hell off my lawn," she murmured. A familiar voice behind her. "You sound like a grumpy old man, Shelby." Captain Valls walked onto the bridge. "Sounds like something I would say. Hell, sounds like something Tim would have said." Proctor nodded. "If only Granger were actually here, President Quimby might actually listen to him." Valls shook his head. "Every time needs its own hero, Shelby. And this time you're it." He thumbed up at the screen. "Let's get this done and go home." "Let's go home," she repeated, still staring at the screen. The Golgothic ship was still a dot at the center, hovering over a spot on the northern hemisphere. "Is Ethan okay?" "And why are you up here, Ballsy? He'll be fine eventually. And have you seen the CIC? Fighter Bay is gone. No reason for me to be down there. Figured I'd be more help up here." "Fine. You're my new XO." She swiveled to face him. "Did you have to kill him, Ballsy?" It was still so raw. It had been years since she'd seen death and blood, and now between Captain Prucha and Commander Yarbrough she'd seen too much of it. "Was that necessary? You could have shot his leg out or something. He was a witness. He could have been interrogated, implicated everyone else. I think Mullins and Shovik Orion is up to something sinister. But I can't prove it yet. I needed Yarbrough to testify." "And what if he refused to testify?" She risked some dark humor. "Then I at least would have liked to break his leg trying to wring the information out of him." A shadow passed over Vals's face and he gripped the handrail. "The bastard killed a few good pilots down there, Shelby. And a dozen deckhands. And he had a gun pointed straight at your chest. If I hadn't acted, you might be dead." He walked over to the XO's station, which had sat vacant for the past half hour. She hadn't even noticed when they'd removed Yarbrough's body. That was the worst part of war. The trivialization of death. 10,000 here, 1,000,000 there. A body on the floor one moment, now it's gone. Where did it go? Didn't matter. There were more. there were always more. If only the Grangerites knew what Granger, what Proctor, what all of them had to turn into to win a war. You had to be a killing machine, or else you died. You became a factory whose input was weapons, hordes of willing, heroic young men and women, and a shit ton of coffee. And the output was bodies. Lots of them. And if you died, then humanity fell, simple as that. Be the last one standing, and humanity lives on. "Fuck war," she thought. "Language, Shelby," came her mother's voice. In her mind's eye, she flipped off her pearl-clutching mom. Proctor was old, and she felt it in her bones, in her body, in her soul. She was tired. All she wanted was sleep, a beach, and some good wine. And yet here she was as Earth's first defense. She wondered if Granger felt the same way during his last stand over Earth all those years ago. Of course he did. She was old enough, had seen enough, experienced enough, she knew the stakes if she failed. And the lifetime of regret and pain and momentary and fleeting triumphs gave her the tenacity, the energy, the will to say what needed saying. "Get off my fucking lawn!" She pointed up at the alien ship on the screen. "Whitehorse, railguns loaded, laser caps primed?" "Yes, Admiral." She waved back at Mumford. "Have you gone through that data yet? The price we paid was high enough, it had better have been worth it." He nodded. "It was, ma'am. I've located several spots on their hull that might be vulnerable. And from these new scans, it looks like Lieutenant Civic's stunt actually did far more damage than anything we've hit it with so far. The hatch, where those spheres came out of, is stuck open, and the structural integrity around the blast zone is greatly diminished." She smiled grimly. "Good. Let's go finish the job." Chapter 57. Terran Sector, Saturn System, Titan. Bridge, ISS Independence. "The ship is opening fire, Admiral. Drilling beam is tunneling down into Titan," said Whitehorse. "And nothing if not predictable." Proctor stroked her chin. So far there had been no word from the Bolivar system about any change on Ido, besides the minuscule but unmistakably persistent increase in mass. Same with Elamine. And she supposed there were any number of other moons that the Golgothics had targeted that they simply didn't know about, because United Earth only had worlds or outposts in perhaps 5% of all star systems. Only so many Earths and Britannias to go around. "Position us right under that hatch Mr. Civic was kind enough to destroy for us." A minute later they were there. On the screen, with the golden mists of Titan forming a striking backdrop, the alien ship, with its burrowing purple-white beam, hung in space with its damaged section exposed to their view. Proctor secured her seat restraint. "Open fire." The distant thumps from the deck told her the railguns were firing, and the view screen confirmed as dozens of tiny explosions erupted from the damaged section of the Golgothic ship. Finally. "Reading power fluctuations from the ship, Admiral," said Mumford. "Their structural integrity is weakening." "Good. Keep it up, Lieutenant." Lieutenant Whitehorse coordinated the barrage with her targeting crew, and soon the entire ship shuddered with the response from the alien ship. "It's returning fire, Admiral." The view screen flashed with weapons fire. It seemed the other ship had finally decided the Independence was a threat, and instead of just the occasional railgun slug, it was letting loose with other energy weapons similar to the drilling beam. 4 different spots on the ship erupted with purple-white beams lancing out towards the Independence. The ship rumbled. "Those have some bite, Shelby," said Vols. "Decompression reported on decks 5, 10, 12, and 16, all starboard." "Will laser countermeasures work against those beams?" she shouted out to anyone who could answer. Mumford shook his head. "Unknown, Admiral, but we can try." "Do it!" Moments later, the space in between them filled with rushing streams of silvery gas, each intersecting an enemy beam, and composed of trillions of tiny, micron-sized mirrors that would reflect and disperse incoming laser blasts. An explosion ripped through the deck below them, which nearly threw Proctor out of her chair in spite of the restraints. "And?" "Some effect, yes. Incident power reduced by 50%, said Mumford, the edge in his voice rising with each rumble of the deck. She wondered if it would be enough. On the screen, it was obvious the Golgothic's ship was taking considerable damage. Civic's stunt had apparently weakened the ship enough to allow their rounds to penetrate the hull. She wondered what kind of technology had allowed the ship to essentially be immune to their weapons earlier. Solid-state plating? Smart steel armor? "Shelby, we're not going to make it," yelled Vols. "We're losing structural integrity past Section 8. On the screen, the alien ship was taking a pounding. But not fast enough, not hard enough, damn it. "Risa, port thrusters! Show them our other side!" The barrage continued. Explosions rang out below decks, above their heads, all along the hull and deep in its core near the bridge. Proctor gripped her chair like it was a life raft. "Steady," she said. "Maintain fire. The bastard has to give eventually." "Shelby, we're facing a core breach here. Raina Scott is yelling in my ear to get the hell out or we're toast." Proctor pounded the armrest. "No." She pointed up at the screen and turned to face him. "We've got them right where we want them. Let's finish this, damn it. Finish this for Danny, then go find him." Vols lowered his voice. "Shelby, get us out of here or we're dead. That thing will just keep doing its thing while we burn. We can come back, fight another day. But we gain nothing by throwing away our lives." She turned to Mumford. "Status of the Golgothics." "Widespread power fluctuations. Structural integrity damaged, but holding." He looked, shaking his head. "We're giving them a beating, but I'm afraid it's going to take a lot more to finish the job." "Damn it. Ensign Risa, back us off full thrust. Get us around the limb of the atmosphere." The inertial cancellers must have been damaged, since the sudden change of velocity threw her back into the chair and to the side. But after a few seconds the rumbling and shaking dropped away, as they escaped the incoming fire from the alien ship. Soon the image of the other vessel, drilling relentlessly into Titan with its purple-white beam, disappeared behind the orange line of atmosphere on the limb of the moon. She breathed deep and closed her eyes. "Vols. Damage report. Casualties." "Heavy structural damage all over the ship from the enemy's railgun. Their energy beam didn't penetrate as deeply, but where it did, they cut in at least a section or two. Life support out on about a quarter of the ship. Raina's got the core under control, but the power couplers from the reactor are out, so everything electrically powered is on batteries until they're back up. Casualties." He shook his head. "Reports still coming in, but estimates are at least 80 dead, 50+ are severely wounded, and dozens missing." Whitehorse cleared her throat. "And Admiral not to pile it on, but the ISS Vanguard just Q-jumped in. Mullins brought his fleet. Admiral Tigre, too, with his ships." Lieutenant Querty flagged her attention, speaking softly. "Admiral? Admiral Mullins is calling for our surrender, and for you to be arrested." "The hell is wrong with him? Is he blind?" She waved at the screen, where in place of the alien ship drilling into Titan, the IDF fleet now approached. "Can he not see we're under attack?" Vols grunted. "Looks like he wants to prove to everyone he's not bought off by Shovik Orion, but is actually the knight in shining armor, bringing in the vigilante." Proctor chuckled a dark laugh. "So I'm a vigilante now, huh?" "Incoming hail from Admiral Tigre, ma'am," said Querty. "Private channel, wants to talk just to you." "Patch him through to my terminal here." She motioned to her console next to her chair. It was private enough. She didn't have time to retreat to her ready room, and she'd already been through life and death with her bridge crew. She had nothing to hide from them. "Shelby," he began as soon as his face appeared on her screen, "you need to be careful here. Half the government, half of IDF High Command thinks you're in bed with GPC terrorists. President Quimby authorized Admiral Mullins to bring you in for questioning." "The President? Where the hell is Fleet Admiral Oppenheimer?" "Still on Britannia." Tigre leaned in close to the screen. "Shelby, the reason I'm here, besides the fact that I figured you'd want some backup against that ship. Shelby, I've heard from my team on Sangre de Cristo." She felt her heart fall into her gut. "And?" "They found Danny's remains. He fell through the atmosphere, landed in a remote area. He didn't survive re-entry. My people say he probably died very quickly once he hit the atmosphere. No suffering. I'm sorry, Shelby." So, She'd failed. She'd failed before she even started. Maybe it was just time to pack it in, retire for good, get the hell away from Mullins and politics and war, humanity be damned. If she couldn't even protect her own family. Thank you, Miguelito. It's a relief to know the truth, finally. She just realized her head had been cradled in her hands, and she looked up at him. I'm done here, Miguel. I'm out. Will you get me a shuttle? I'm going back to Britannia. I'm going back home. For good this time. Shelby, don't try to convince me to stay. No. I resign. I came into this to find Danny. He's found. Now I'm going home. I've lived my life, done my part, fought my wars, and now I deserve a little peace. Admiral Tigre squinted, grit his teeth. Oh, Miguel, don't try to stop me. Shelby, there's something else you should know. Danny's suit was relatively intact. At least the data chips were. His camera was running the entire time from the point he put the suit on to when he hit. Miguel, it's done. I don't... Tigre held up a hand. Shut up and listen, Shelby. My people have analyzed the video. Lots to tell you. In fact, you'll want to hear it, since Danny left you a heartfelt message right before he hit atmosphere. But the important part is what came before. Shelby, you remember the video feed from the satellite over Sangre de Cristo? The one Curiel broadcast? It's faked. Or doctored, at least. She leaned forward. How so? The ship that intercepted the Magdalena Issacar? On the satellite imagery it looks clean, with no hull markings. But on Danny's video feed, the markings are quite clear. In fact, on his feed, it's an entirely different ship. Whoever edited the satellite's video was very, very good. Which ship? She whispered, fearing the answer, fearing the truth, fearing what it might do to her, what it would make her do. She'd been done. She thought it was over. But depending on Tigre's answer, it may only have just begun. The ISS Vanguard, said Tigre. Mullins' ship. It's only begun, she thought, her fists clenched. Do you have any idea what his endgame is, Shelby? Said Admiral Tigre. If he was responsible for the bomb at Sangre and responsible for smuggling that other nuke onto your ship, the consequences are terrifying. There's more. I don't have all the proof I need yet, but I think Shovik Orion has developed a device, something we call a metaspace shunt. It was on both bombs, though the one over Earth was underpowered. What does it do? So far, our best guess is that it summons the alien ship. At least that's what's happened both times it was used. Tigre shook his head. Why in the world would Shovik Orion, or Admiral Mullins for that matter, want to summon an alien force to invade our space? That, said Proctor, is an excellent question. I think we should ask him. Admiral, said Lieutenant Querty from behind her, has received a metaspace message from San Martin. El Amin has exploded. Chapter 58. Terran Sector, Saturn System, Titan. Bridge, ISS Independence. Exploded? What do you mean, exploded? Proctor couldn't believe her ears. Querty stared at his screen. That's what they're saying, Admiral. First some gravitational instabilities, then a catastrophic pressure buildup in the mantle, then an explosion. The planet is mainly in several large fragments drifting away from each other, but they're projected to fall back down to the barycenter, crash, and basically throw out a huge rubble cloud over the coming weeks. Proctor turned back to Tigre on her screen. Did you hear? He nodded grimly. We've been watching it, keeping an eye on those instabilities, but this changes everything. Is San Martin at risk? She said, thinking of the billions of people back on the main populated planet of that system. No, not for decades. El Amin is about as far away from San Martin as Pluto is from Earth. But still, Shelby, if that happens to Titan... She stood up, still looking down at him on her console. I know. Millions of people here in the Saturn moon system alone. If Titan goes, they all die within weeks. And if Earth is next, just think what an exploding moon could do to it. 7 horsemen of the apocalypse type stuff, no doubt, said Tigray. End of times. She bent over and leaned into the console, gripping both sides of it. Miguel, are you with me? I need to know. The Mullins issue will have to wait, but this ship, we need to stop it, now. He nodded. To the end, Shelby. I was a young man back during the Swarm War, but to me, you were a hero. Still are. You weren't a step behind Granger, he just got all the glory. And the bullshit celebrity religion. Yeah, I'm with you. Let's go save Earth again. Good. I'm about to make a fleet-wide announcement. Might be helpful for you to chime in afterward. That'd give the ship captains some cover to disobey Mullins and follow us in. And once we go in, target the weakened areas of the ship we've already hit. If we all bombard those spots together, we might just save our asses. And Earth's. Acknowledged. Tigray out. His face disappeared, and Proctor turned around to the comm. Lieutenant Querty, open a broad channel to the whole fleet, Mullins's and Tigray's both. A moment later, he nodded. Open, Admiral. There goes nothing. Speeches, the part Granger always hated. Why couldn't everyone just know what the hell they should be doing without having a damned motivational speech thrown at them? This is Admiral Shelby Proctor, former Fleet Admiral of IDF. As you all know, I've been called back into service by Fleet Admiral Oppenheimer to face this new alien threat. We've just received word from San Martin that the planet the alien ship already assaulted, El Amin, has exploded. If we don't act now, every inhabited moon in the Saturn system is at risk, and it won't end there. The alien ship could very well move on to Earth. I understand you've seen a lot of confusing things today, and heard possibly contradictory orders. You saw a nuclear weapon launch from my ship and nearly destroy Europe. You've seen my ship try to disable the weapon rather than immediately destroy it, and moved to block the Vanguard from destroying it as well. I assure you, all, there were very good reasons for these actions, and that I've acted for the survival of Earth and all of humanity in everything I've done. The Independence has even faced this alien ship 3 times now, and failed. Every time. I can't do this alone. That ship must be destroyed. Our survival depends on it. But I need your help. I'm going back in. All fleet captains, you're more than welcome to join me. It's now or never. Proctor out. Vols grunted behind her. Not bad. She shot him a look. Not great, but better than Granger ever did. He was almost smiling, but only in his eyes. The circumstances were too dire for anything more. Ma'am, Cordy began, Admiral Tigray is announcing his support to the fleet and ordering his captains to follow us in, and from the sounds of it, several of the captains under Mullins are pledging their support. Proctor sat back down and secured her restraints. Battle stations. Lieutenant Querty, please pass along the instructions for generating the virtual metamaterial hull shroud so the rest of the fleet can block the Golgothic's broadcast. Ensign Risa, half thrusters back towards the Golgothic ship. Let's see who follows us. A tense minute passed. They watched on the view screen as a handful of ships broke off from the main body of the fleet. Admiral Tigray's ships, followed by others that had come with Admiral Mullins. But only a few. Lieutenant Whitehorse caught her attention. We've got a total of 15, Admiral. 2 heavy cruisers, a handful of light cruisers, and the rest missile frigates. It'll have to be enough. We ready, Ballsy? All systems besides thrusters still on batteries, but weapons crews are ready. Ready as we'll ever be under the circumstances. On the view screen, a battle schematic on one half showed the other ships flanking the Independence on either side. On the other half, the tiny dot of the alien ship was just becoming visible against the line of the horizon. The sparkling purple drilling beam, a striking shaft of light against the drab, brown-orange of the atmosphere. Proctor to fleet, she began, inclining her head toward her console to help the battle software understand who she was talking to. With a glance at the battle schematic, she started rattling off names and instructions. Justice, Missouri, Paris, Dakota, Amsterdam, Gennaro, Swigert. Form up into support and cover configuration, Vickers Beta. Break off and come in from the north. Jakarta, Weibo, Budapest, Orlando, San Diego, Manitos, Formidable, and Mumbai. You're with the Independents. We'll descend 10 kilometers and come at it from below. Support and cover formation, Vickers Delta. The attack wings sorted themselves into formation, and within 2 minutes they were in weapons range. The Golgothic ship loomed ahead of them and at a higher elevation, the drilling beam plunging down past them into the crust. Open fire! Chapter 59. Terran Sector, Saturn System, Titan. Bridge, ISS Independence. It had been 30 years since the last time Proctor had seen so many ships in a live-fire situation, and while the railgun slugs sailing past were undetectable to the eye, their effect on the alien ship was not. It sparked with dozens, then hundreds of explosions per second. She wondered what the hell was holding it together. Even a swarm carrier would never have withstood such a withering assault. "Massive power fluctuations, Admiral," said Mumford. "The more the sensors read on this thing, the more I'm seeing that it's not only technologically advanced, ma'am, it's light years past our capabilities. It seems to have almost an organically distributed power system, with modest self-repair capabilities at the molecular level." "You're saying it will regenerate?" "If we let it, yes, it appears so." "Well, let's not let it. All ships, add in laser fire to the mix. Torpedoes if you got 'em." The comm chattered with affirmatives. "The regeneration rate is far too slow to catch up, Admiral. And the other good news, I'm reading that the launch mechanism for those spheres is hopelessly damaged. Destroyed. That thing won't be launching anything down into that hole it's drilling." Proctor nervously tapped her temple. "And why is it drilling?" That didn't make any sense. The vessel was under attack and destruction was imminent. Why was it still drilling when it could bring that weapon to bear on the ships attacking it? "Admiral, the rest of the fleet is here. Admiral Mullins is signaling for your surrender, quote, as soon as the threat is neutralized," said QWERTY. "Like hell," Proctor mumbled under her breath. "Mumford, are you still not detecting any life signs on that thing?" "None that I can recognize, Admiral. We still can't penetrate up into every single area of the ship, though. But at the moment it looks like the ship is AI-based. I'm not seeing any organic matter in there." "No Golgothics, huh? Maybe we were a little premature to latch onto a name for them," she said absent-mindedly. She wanted to wait, to tell the ships to hold fire, to give her time to study this thing, to figure it out, communicate with it. Try, one last time to understand it before she was forced to kill it. Like she was ordered to kill the last dormant swarm vessels. Like the matriarch. Mother killer. The epithet rang in her ears. "Well, this is odd," began Mumford. But before he could say any more, it exploded. The beam fluttered, pulsed in a seemingly random pattern, and disappeared. The ship cracked into several pieces. Several cheers rang across the bridge from the members of the crew watching the view screen. The feeling was bittersweet, watching the broken pieces of the ship begin to fall from the spot where it had exploded, realizing she'd saved the day. But she'd killed without understanding. Humanity was safe, but another race was not. Was this an entire ship of AI beings? Had she killed an entire race? Was it a scout ship from another species that was looking for a new home? So many unanswered questions. She started to turn to Mumford to ask him what he'd found odd, but Lieutenant Whitehorse caught her attention. "Admiral, the Vanguard is coming about," she said. "They're targeting us with railguns." "Bastard," she muttered. "All weapons crews retarget. Set your sights on their guns only. We're going for neutralization of their weapon systems, nothing more." "Shelby, there's a shuttle leaving our shuttle bay," yelled Vols from across the bridge. "Who?" Before he could answer, Lieutenant QWERTY pointed up at the comm speakers. "They're transmitting, Admiral." The comm speakers crackled on. "Admiral Mullins, this is Lieutenant Ethan Civic. I've got Admiral Proctor on board the shuttle. We're both turning ourselves in. Please send an approach vector and docking instructions. Civic out." Proctor stood up and paced toward the screen, watching the shuttle arc wide around the Independence, against the backdrop of the huge chunks of Golgothic ship that were falling down through Titan's atmosphere.
What the hell is he playing at?
She turned to Vols, whose jaw was set tight.
Ballsy?
He's going to kill Mullins, he muttered. Probably the whole ship. He's going to overload the reactor on the shuttle, and he's going to kill Mullins along with the rest of the Vanguard. There's no other explanation.
Is he out of his mind?
Vols nodded, slowly. Mullins killed Batak. Ethan and her were getting to be good friends. And he's been on the edge anyway. Seeing her die in the blast when we were so close to getting her out of there. He sighed. Yeah, this is classic, Ethan. When something doesn't go your way, you torpedo the whole thing.
Open a channel,
she said.
Ethan Civic, this is Admiral Proctor. Get your ass back in our shuttle bay. Now! That's an order.
After a moment, Civic answered. Ma'am, I was trying to give you a chance to get away.
Bullshit! I'm not running from this situation, and neither are you. We're done running.
She paused, mentally redirecting her attention to the rest of the fleet, undoubtedly listening in.
Ethan, they found my nephew's body. His suit was intact. We've got video evidence of Admiral Mullins and the ISS Vanguard docking with the Magdalena Issachar moments before its demise. It was Mullins all along, the new president of Shovik Orion. Yes, Ted, I know you're listening in, and yes, I have proof. You know...
She paused, leaning back in her chair, propping a foot on her bad knee.
When this all started a few days ago, I wanted nothing more than to get in, find my nephew, maybe save humanity, maybe not, but definitely go back to my beach house when it was all over and just kick back with a martini and an unflattering bathing suit. But you've convinced me, Ted. You've convinced me to come back and root out the cancer. This is your official notice. Assholes that threaten my family and that threaten humanity and Earth and all its planets have me to answer to. Understood?
The comm was silent. Civic didn't say a word, thankfully understanding that this wasn't about him for once. Mullins didn't reply either, apparently sizing her up and wondering how much she was bluffing. She prayed he called her bluff. She wanted nothing more than to beat the ever-living shit out of him. To her surprise, Mullins's ship flickered and disappeared.
Admiral, the Vanguard's Q-jumped away, along with most of the ships in his fleet.
She sighed.
Damn. I was kind of hoping to teach him a lesson.
She stood up and smiled at Vols.
At least him hightailing it out of here basically validated my point. PR win, right?
He nodded. I think the next board meeting at Shovik Orion will definitely be... lively. She tapped her finger against her temple, deep in thought.
What's your game, Ted Mullins?
She ran through the details. First, he'd played the GPC to get those 2 missiles, then framed the GPC by making it look like the Magdalena Issachar had committed a false flag operation and attacked its own people, ostensibly to generate sympathy and enthusiasm for the cause. Now he was playing her and IDF, or rather trying to get her out of the way and keep his influence within IDF. He'd probably arranged for the design of the metaspace shunt. Now that she thought about it, he'd probably arranged for both attempts on her life, too. And at San Martin he was probably trying to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, kill her and Secretary General Curiel. But why? Power? He already had it. Money? Just didn't make sense yet. She needed more time to investigate, time she didn't have. Commander Mumford caught her attention. Ma'am, I was trying to tell you earlier.
What is it?
Something I picked up on the sensors earlier. It didn't show up before, but the more the fleet's weapons penetrated into the ship, the deeper I was able to scan. The ship, Admiral, the ship is... well, let me just show you. He fiddled with his console, then pointed up at the front view screen. This is a reconstructed image I put together from the most recent scan. It came from a piece of interior hull plating deep up inside the ship. She turned back toward the screen. The image was grainy, but still easy to read. Letters.
I-S-S. Vic.
Her sweat went cold. ISS Vic, said Vols. That could be anything. He shook his head as if trying to convince himself. Impossible.
No, said Proctor. I'd recognize that until the day I die.
She turned to Vols.
ISS Victory. That's the nameplate from her hull.
What the hell is Victory's nameplate doing inside an alien ship? Vols waved his arms up in the air. That's batshit crazy. Mumford cleared his throat. Just to be sure, ma'am, I brought up an old materials analysis of the ISS Victory and compared it.
Tungsten, right?
Right. He nodded, but pointed at the screen. That's tungsten, all right. But the isotopics are all wrong. It clearly does not have the same isotopic signature as the material used for the Victory's hull.
So, what the hell is it then?
She watched the other side of the screen as the broken pieces of the ship continued to fall through the atmosphere. Mumford swallowed hard. The interesting thing is that if you take the old isotopic signature and step it forward in time by about, 13 billion years, then you get what we're reading now.
Possible.
More than impossible, it was utterly crazy. Completely, utterly, batshit crazy, as Ballsy said. As the contractor Sarah Batak would say, it don't rain, but it shitstorms. But the only thing she could say as she collapsed into her chair was a name. Tim. Chapter 60. Terran Sector, Saturn System, Titan. Bridge, ISS Independence. Mumford shook his head. No, Admiral, I can basically scan the whole ship now, and I can confidently say there is no organic material anywhere over there. Captain Timothy Granger is not—
I know that. I'm not a friggin' Grangerite, she snapped. But still, the evidence is here. The data is... data. Could he have sent something back out of that black hole? How? Why?
She racked her brain, even as she watched the pieces of the ship fall down towards the hole it had carved on the surface of Titan.
Replay the video, the moment it finally exploded.
She waved at the screen. The image of the piece of hull with the faded imprint of ISS Vic disappeared, replaced by the video from the final moments of the battle. Hundreds of explosions peppered the surface of the alien ship. The drilling beam was still lancing out towards the surface. It fluttered erratically, then disappeared and the ship exploded.
Slow it down, and repeat.
The video repeated, this time at a quarter speed. The beam. The realization struck her, and she remembered how Rex had tapped out a pattern on that safe house door. The code. She watched it flutter, this time in a pattern she recognized.
Holy shit. Ballsy, are you seeing what I'm seeing?
He shrugged. A high-powered antimatter drilling beam? She turned around.
Morse code. Mumford, slow it down, and QWERTY, please translate. I can't remember everything like I used to.
Yes'm, he drawled. The video repeated, slower this time, and the fact that there was a pattern was unmistakable. QWERTY finally looked over at her. Coming.
That's it?
She said, though even as she said it, she felt foolish. She'd finally made contact with the aliens behind the construction and operation of this ship, and all she could say was, "That's it?" "Just one word, ma'am," said QWERTY. "Coming." She shook her head.
No, that can't be it. There has to be more. Analyze the entire video sequence from the moment it started the beam until the end.
Mumford worked, and she watched the pieces fall lower towards Titan. The data feed to the side of the live video indicated the debris was only a few dozen kilometers from crashing on the surface. Nothing. Just that one word at the end, and I checked all bands, all wavelengths. Coming.
Check the other videos. Ito, Elamine, check those.
It took Mumford a minute to retrieve the files and to display them on the view screen. But when QWERTY looked up at them, lips mumbling, she saw the answer bloom on his face.
There was more. "Lieutenant?" He gulped. "It says, Shelby, they're coming." "Shelby, they're coming." Chapter 61. Terran Sector, Saturn System, Titan. Bridge, ISS Independence. "Oh my God," she breathed. Vols bolted across the bridge and gripped her armrest as he bent low to her. "What does it mean?" She didn't want to say the words. She didn't want to say them because they couldn't be true. They couldn't be. She said them anyway. "It means that the swarm is back." The bridge, already quiet, fell to a dead silence. "No," said Vols. His finger jabbed at the view screen, punctuating almost every word. "No, you killed the last of their ships. Granger piloted the Victory and 100 antimatter bombs into that black hole, and the Skiora themselves confirmed that the metaspace link through that thing was shut. Permanently." They all stared at the falling fragments. "Shelby, they're coming." "Admiral, reading a power surge from one of the pieces of the alien ship," Whitehorse yelled from Tactical. "What is it doing?" The video zoomed in on the falling pieces. One large chunk of the ship was pulling away from the rest, as if it had thrusters propelling it. "That's the central core section, Admiral," said Mumford. "It appears to have its own thrusters." "Shoot it down," she said. "Now." Whitehorse shook her head. "Sorry, Admiral, it's at the bottom of the atmosphere now. Railgun slugs will never hit it, and lasers would be too dissipated at that distance." She stood up and dashed to the helm. "Risa, get us down there, full thrusters, now!" A hand on her shoulder. "Shelby, it's already gone," said Balsey. "Look." The roughly spherical chunk of the alien ship plunged lower and lower, accelerating, and with an anticlimactic puff of dust and debris, disappeared into the hole it had bored into the crust. Moments later, the rest of the ship collided with the surface, landing with catastrophic force all around the hole, sending up huge billows of brown dust, which plumed into a massive mushroom cloud, as if the area had been hit by a nuclear blast. "Sensors reading that the impact of the rest of the ship on the surface has closed the hole up with rock and debris." Whitehorse looked up from Tactical. "It's gone." But she knew it wasn't gone. She knew it in her gut, deep down. It wasn't gone. "Shelby, they're coming." Epilogue. Terran Sector, Earth. Elysium Fields Memorial Gardens, Nashville, Tennessee. For every funeral Shelby Proctor had ever gone to, it had rained. Granger's funeral, her sister's when she was young, all the friends she'd lost in the intervening years, rain. Every single one. Except this one, and she found it ironic. The sun was shining on a glorious spring morning at the cemetery outside Nashville, completely out of place in her mind. Not only was her nephew dead, not only was Admiral Mullins still on the loose, not only was the mass of Titan slowly but perceptibly increasing, just as Ido's and Elamine's had, not only was the GPC increasing in influence due to the Sangre incident, compounded by the recently exposed video from Danny's suit of the ISS Vanguard docking with the Magdalena Issachar. But in addition to all this, the message encoded in the alien ship's drilling beam never left her mind. Not for a moment. "Shelby, they're coming." "Shelby, they're coming." "Shelby, they're coming." The words of warning repeated themselves in her mind like a mantra, like a dirge. The sun shone anyway, oblivious to her dread. Her brother squeezed her hand. He smiled at her. But it was a strained, hollow smile. He was putting on a good show for her. The priest had paused the service momentarily to drink from a water bottle, and her sister-in-law, standing on the other side of her brother, said, "It's so beautiful here." A cross rested on her chest. She was a believer.
and from the peaceful look on her face it looked like she meant it.
It won't look so beautiful when the swarm comes back, Proctor thought.
In her mind's eye, the tranquil scene of trees and grass and blue sky was overwritten with death and destruction, the only thing the swarm had ever brought them. Somehow, he'd come back to warn them. But that was silly. That was Patriarch Huntsman talking. Tim was dead. The scientists were beyond sure. They even had video evidence of the old ISS Victory being stretched by the extreme tidal forces of the black hole, beyond what anyone could live through. But somehow, against all probability, he or someone had sent her the warning. Shelby, they're coming. At least she assumed the word they meant the swarm, and Shelby meant that the message was for her, probably from someone close to her. Who else but Tim? And coming? That meant soon. She felt it in her gut. The priest continued and concluded, and everyone lined up to throw soil on the coffin. The funeral officially over. She lingered by the grave, standing next to her brother, who'd sat on the bench nearby. "Thank you, Shelby, for finding him." The words felt hollow in her mouth.
"I'm sorry. I didn't find him in time."
"There was nothing you could have done. He was dead before you even knew about Sangre." He sighed. "But it means a lot to me that you dropped everything to find him, to bring him back here." She squeezed his shoulder.
"Are you coming back to Britannia? I can give you a lift. I'm heading out that way on the Independence in a few days."
He shook his head. "Jess's family lives here in Nashville. I think we're going to move here to be closer to them, at least for now. She's more devastated than she lets on." Proctor nodded. She bent low to hug him one last time, then made for the marine transport she'd arrived in. Fleet Admiral Oppenheimer was waiting for her.
"What do you want?"
she said, starting to climb up into the car. His face was ice. "I want you to retire. Disappear. Go lay on your beach. You've done your part, you've done what I asked of you, and now it's time to leave it alone." She paused and climbed back down to the ground.
"You haven't talked to President Quimby yet, have you? Because he told me something quite the opposite this morning."
Oppenheimer grunted. "I'm well aware of your conversation with President Quimby. He's scared shitless. The alien ship striking so close to home and the news about the Victory's hull has him spooked. Of course he wants you to stay. He's deluded. He thinks you can save us from what's coming, when all that's coming is cleaning up the mess Mullins caused and getting a handle on the GPC political situation, which frankly is neither of our jobs. So I'm telling you again, leave. Go home. Go back to where you belong, a well-deserved retirement." She stared at him for a moment, seeing the twitch in his eye. It was a tell. She knew he wanted nothing more than for her to disappear and get out of his hair. But it was clear he was hiding something. He wanted her gone for reasons other than his ego. And she wasn't going to let him get away with it.
"See you on Britannia, Christian."
"Shelby, She stepped back up into the entrance hatch of the ground car.
"I know you're serious, Christian, but so am I. I'm not leaving. You're stuck with me."
She sat down in her seat, and before the waiting Marine closed the door, she smiled back up at the Fleet Admiral through the open window.
"And I'm going to get to the bottom of it. All of it. It's what I do. I figure shit out."
She motioned to the Marine to shut the door. Through the window she could see Oppenheimer silently fuming. Good. Let him fume. It wouldn't change her resolve to get to the bottom of Danny's death, of Mullins's schemes, of Oppenheimer's possible involvement in those schemes. It wouldn't change the fact that they were coming, whoever they were. It wouldn't change the fact that, in spite of being dead, Tim Granger had sent her a message. Somehow, against all the laws of nature, he'd sent her a message from the center of a black hole. A message that had taken 13 billion years to reach her. She waved to the driver.
"I'm ready."
This has been Independence, Book 1 of the Legacy Ship Trilogy by Nick Webb. Text and production copyright 2016 by Nick Webb. All rights reserved. The production was recorded and directed at Kenswold Studios in Dryden, New York. Post-production services by Ashley Kutch. More books by Nick Webb are available in ebook and audio editions, and you can stay up to date with new release information, special release offers, and short stories by following the author online at www.nickwebwrites.com. Look for new independent works in the Legacy Fleet universe, available now in ebook editions.
Audible